Welcome back. So this is one of the more important lessons in the entire course, but it's also going to be very different than anything we've done thus far. And the reason that it's different is that I'm going to be showing you a bunch of code that you have never seen before and you are not expected to understand at all. The reason I'm doing this is I want to give you a conceptual overview of how all these pieces fit together: the database, the server, GET requests, POST requests, the browser, all these different things, requests and responses. I want to show all of that with a really simple working application. So that's what I'm going to do here. If I was teaching this in person, this would be the point where I ask you to put your laptop down, to close your computer. Obviously not a good idea here, but the sentiment behind that is that I don't want you to be taking notes on this. We're going to go over every single line and write it from scratch and make 5, 6, 7 of these different apps using these concepts. So this is just about how the things fit together, not the actual details of how they work. With that said, let's go ahead and get started here. So this application is themed around dogs. It's very, very simple, no styling at all, just a few different pages. And the first thing we need to talk about is what this entire file is. So this is our server file. In my case, it's called app.js. This is written in JavaScript. And when I run this file, it will actually start a server for me. So when I've mentioned before, when we send a request to reddit.com/search, there's code on Reddit's server that is listening for a request to reddit.com/search, and then it sends you back the correct data in a response. When I say there's code on Reddit's server, this is the kind of code we're talking about. So even though Reddit is done in Python, and this is JavaScript, this is our code on the server that is listening for different requests and then responding with different pieces. There are 3 big chunks, and this up top is just getting our application set up. So including the right libraries. As you can see, there's a few dependencies. Again, we'll go over all of them later. Then we have some database stuff. So this is setting up our database so that our database knows every dog has a name and a breed, and they're both strings. And that's all I'll mention about that for now. And then there are these things called routes, which is where we'll spend the bulk of our time in this lesson. Before we do that though, I want to point out the most important part to actually start the server, which is at the very end here. This line doesn't matter the syntax, but what does matter, there's a number here, 3000. What this will do is when we run this application, when I run this file in my terminal, it will actually start a server up and our application will be on port 3000. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to start this server up by running the file. Again, doesn't really matter what I'm doing there. And you can see I get a message, serving dog demo on port 3000. So what I have, my text editor, I'm writing the code in here for my server. Then in my terminal, I'm actually running the server. So now this code is being run, all of this code is run, and this line in particular started a server on port 3000. So if I go to port 3000 now, and the way I get there is localhost 3000, I see something that says homepage. Let's talk about how I'm getting that homepage HTML. If we view page source, you can see all that I got as a response was a single H1 that says homepage, and that's it. So if I go back to my server here, there are a few things I want to point out. The first one is that in my terminal, where the server has started, there's a little message that was printed out. And what this tells us is that someone made a GET request, which is what this says here, to the URL /. So localhost 3000 /. So there's nothing afterward. We call this the root path, or just root, which is basically what we want our home page to be. So again, I went to localhost 3000 and hit enter, and that got me some code. But if I went to localhost 3000 / dogs, that gives me some different stuff back. And if I view the page source on this, you can see we get some more content that's different than the content we got the first time. And that's because this is a different URL or a different route. So in this case, I wasn't just asking for /, I was asking for /dogs. And if you look in the terminal output, you can see there's a difference between a GET request to / or a GET request to /dogs. This is just showing me so I can show you what's happening. but this isn't logic or anything. It's just a window into the requests that are being made. Okay, so that's the request side of things. When I hit enter, I make a GET request. Same thing here. I'm just making them to two different places. And of course, I can make those GET requests with Postman as well. So let's make a GET request to localhost 3000, just like that. Take a moment and think about what you expect us to see when I hit send. There we go, I just get the exact same H1. And if I do localhost 3000/dogs, which is a GET request, and I hit send, I get the same HTML that we got when I made a GET request in the browser by hitting enter. Now let's talk about the logic that makes all of this happen on the server side. So I'm going to go back to Sublime and focus on these three parts right here, and in particular, these two. I know I'm a broken record on this topic, but the syntax is not the important part. We will be spending so much time on actually writing these routes that that's not significant. What is significant is that in this first little chunk, this code is listening for a GET request to /. So get/. And when that happens, we are rendering a page called home. So again, when a GET request is made to / localhost 3000 / nothing else, then we're going to render something called home. And over here, I have the file called home. Doesn't matter what the EJS is. And inside of it, there's an H1 that says homepage. So let's add something else in there, a paragraph. Hello, just like that, and save. And now when I make a GET request, only a GET request to /, I get the contents of that file, home, sent back to me. And in order for those changes to work, I actually have to restart my server. So I'll restart it now. And watch, I'll put this over on the side, and I'll go back to Chrome. Get my server there again. I'm going to make a GET request to localhost 3000. And as you can see, it tells me a GET request was made to /, and we got this content back. So again, our code here is listening for a GET request to / and deciding what file to send back. Now here's another more complicated version of that, where we're listening for a GET request to /dogs, and then there's some other code that's happening here, and I'll just write a comment. All that happens here is get all the dogs from the database. So I have some in my database already. And then the next part is render the dogs file, and we'll just leave it at that for now. So we're getting all the dogs from the database and rendering the dogs file, which is right here. And this one looks a little bit different. It's not just HTML. We have some weird stuff here that we haven't seen before. But at the end of the day, what happens is when I go to /dogs, our app is listening for a GET request to /dogs. When it gets one, it retrieves all of the dogs from the database, and each one has a name and a breed, and then it makes a little LI for each one. So each one of these is an LI with a name and a breed. So again, we have two routes, / as a GET request and /dogs as a GET request. And we get two different files and a little bit of logic when we go to /dogs versus when we just go to /, there's no logic happening, nothing's happening with the database. It's just giving us a static page. But this is not static. This depends on what's coming from the database. I'll go back to the server here, to our code, and I'll talk a little bit about this line here. So we're rendering a page, a template called dogs, which is what's written right here, dogs.ejs. But we're passing data to this template because this doesn't have an LI here that says rusty-mutt, and it doesn't have another one afterwards in the template that says Wyatt-golden. As you can see, that's what we're getting in the browser, but our file doesn't have any of that. And that's what makes it dynamic. This file can be different every single time that it runs, depending on what's in the database. So what we actually do is define a template or a pattern for what we want to happen, which is for every dog, dogs.forEach, we want to make an LI where we're going to make the name bold or strong, dash the breed just as plain text. So that's how we end up with this. For every dog in the database that we retrieve, we're going to loop through and make a single LI with the name in bold dash the breed not in bold. So I'll leave it at that. Let's summarize now. So we have our code that creates the server right here. All of this is the only code responsible for making our server. We have some setup code, doesn't really matter. Some database code, doesn't matter much either. And then these two routes, and those do matter a lot. So this is how we get different code and different files depending on the URL that we request. We make a request to slash as a GET request. We get one file, home. We make a GET request to slash dogs, and a little bit more happens behind the scenes. It finds all the dogs in the database, and then it renders the dogs file, but the dogs file is dynamic because it takes in a bunch of dogs, and for each one, it makes an LI. So if we had 10,000 dogs in the database, we would end up with 10,000 LIs. And the very last point I want to make is that we have our text editor here. Then I have a terminal where I'm running the server, and then I'm going in the browser and visiting the web page by making a request. Those are the three tools that we need. So those three things, the text editor where we write the code, a terminal or somewhere where we can start the server and have it listening, and then finally a browser where we can actually go and make requests. So we don't have to use a browser. We could use Postman, but nobody uses Postman to actually interact with our web page. In the next few videos, when we start writing our own web applications, we'll have those three same tools. So we're going to have a text editor, a browser, and a terminal or somewhere to run the server.